The old wooden bench creaked as Maya settled into her usual spot at the very back of Professor Johnson's advanced piano class. While her classmates chatted excitedly about their weekend performances and family concerts, Maya quietly arranged her simple notebook and worn pencil on the small music stand. She had learned to arrive early, not because she was eager, but because it gave her time to mentally prepare for another day of feeling invisible. Around her, the classroom buzzed with the kind of energy that only comes from students who have grown up surrounded by music. There was Jennifer, whose mother was a famous violinist who toured with major orchestras. Her designer music bag probably cost more than Maya's entire monthly budget. Then there was Alex, who casually mentioned having 3 grand pianos at home, one in each of their families' houses. These students didn't just study music, they lived and breathed it from birth. Maya's story was different. She grew up in a small apartment above her grandmother's bakery, where the only sounds were the early morning mixers and the constant hum of ovens. Music wasn't part of her world until she was 12, when she discovered an old electronic keyboard at a garage sale. Her grandmother, seeing the spark in Maya's eyes, scraped together $20 to buy it. That little keyboard with its tinny sound and missing keys became Maya's whole universe. Every day after school, Maya would rush home and plug in her headphones. She taught herself to read music using library books and free online videos. Her fingers learned to dance across those plastic keys, creating melodies that transported her far from the small bakery and the smell of bread dough. Her grandmother would sometimes catch her playing and smile, though she never understood why Maya spent so much time pressing those black and white buttons. When Maya finally convinced her family to let her take real piano lessons, she was already 15, practically ancient in the music world. Most of her current classmates had been playing since they could walk. Her first teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was kind but realistic. She explained that Maya was starting very late, and while she showed promise, she shouldn't expect to compete with students who had years of head start, but Maya didn't care about competition. She cared about the feeling she got when her fingers found the right notes, when a piece suddenly clicked and the music flowed through her like electricity. She practiced on that same garage sale keyboard for 2 more years, saving every penny from her part-time job at the local grocery store. Finally, at 17, she bought a real digital piano. Nothing fancy, but it had weighted keys and didn't sound like a toy. Now, at 19, Maya had somehow made it into the advanced program at the city's music conservatory. She received a partial scholarship based on her audition, though she suspected they were more impressed by her story than her playing. She worked 20 hours a week at the campus coffee shop to pay for the rest of her tuition, plus her share of rent in a tiny apartment she shared with 3 other students. Her apartment was nothing like her classmates' homes. There was no grand piano, no music room, no expensive sound equipment. Maya's digital piano sat in the corner of her bedroom, squeezed between her bed and a wobbly desk. She practiced with headphones on because the walls were thin and her roommates complained. Sometimes she wondered if her neighbors could hear the faint clicking of the keys, even without sound. The conservatory itself felt like stepping into another world. The hallways gleamed with polished marble, and the practice rooms were equipped with beautiful acoustic pianos that probably cost more than Maya's family made in a year. The other students belonged here in a way that Maya wasn't sure she ever would. They talked about summer programs in Europe, private lessons with famous teachers, and competitions with prizes she couldn't imagine. Maya's classmates weren't mean to her. They just didn't see her. She was quiet during discussions, partly because she was naturally shy, but mostly because she felt like she had nothing valuable to contribute. When they talked about their favorite recordings or debated interpretations of famous pieces, Maya stayed silent. She knew the music, but she didn't have the vocabulary or the confidence to join their conversations. Professor Johnson was a respected teacher who had trained several successful concert pianists. He was fair but demanding, and Maya could tell he saw her as a hard worker with limited potential. During lessons, he would nod approvingly at her preparation and correct her technique, but she never saw the spark in his eyes that appeared when he worked with the more gifted students. She was reliable, dedicated, and adequate words that felt like daggers to someone who loved music as much as Maya did. The practice schedule was brutal. While her classmates could focus entirely on their music, Maya had to squeeze practice time around her work shifts and study hours for her general education classes. She often found herself in the practice rooms late at night when the building was nearly empty and the security guard would do his rounds. Those quiet hours became her sanctuary, where she could play without feeling judged or compared to anyone else. What none of her classmates or teachers knew was that Maya had developed an unusual practice routine. Unable to afford sheet music for advanced pieces, she had learned to transcribe music by ear from recordings. She would listen to the same passage hundreds of times, figuring out each note and writing it down by hand. This process, born out of necessity, had given her an incredibly deep understanding of musical structure and an almost photographic memory for compositions. Her small hands were a constant source of frustration. Many advanced pieces seemed written for pianists with large, powerful hands that could easily span wide intervals. Maya had learned to be creative, finding ways to roll chords that were meant to be played solidly, and developing lightning-fast finger techniques to compensate for what she couldn't reach. She studied videos of famous pianists with small hands, learning their tricks and adaptations. The financial pressure was constant. Every month, Maya calculated and recalculated her budget, making sure she could cover tuition, rent, food, and transportation. She bought her music books used, often with previous students' markings already penciled in. Her clothes were simple and practical, a stark contrast to the fashionable outfits her classmates wore. Sometimes she felt like she was playing dress-up, pretending to belong in a world where everyone else seemed naturally at home. Despite all these challenges, Maya had something that couldn't be bought or taught: an absolute, unshakable love for music. When she sat at the piano, all her insecurities melted away. The financial stress, the feelings of inadequacy, the constant comparison to her more privileged classmates, none of it mattered when her fingers touched the keys. In those moments, she wasn't the scholarship student from the wrong side of town. She was a musician, pure and simple. As she sat in the back of the classroom that day, watching Professor Johnson prepare for the lesson, Maya had no idea that everything was about to change. She was just hoping to get through another class without embarrassing herself, completely unaware that her teachers were about to issue a challenge that would reveal the extraordinary talent she had been quietly nurturing in her grandmother's old apartment above the bakery. The faculty lounge at the conservatory was a place where professors gathered between classes, sipping coffee from delicate china cups, and discussing their students with the casual authority that comes from decades of experience. That particular Thursday afternoon, the conversation had turned to the upcoming semester evaluations, and the piano department faculty were reviewing their advanced students. Professor Johnson leaned back in his leather chair, adjusting his reading glasses as he flipped through his notes. Let's see, we have Jennifer performing the Chopin Ballade No. 1. She handled it beautifully, of course. Her technique is flawless. The other professors nodded in agreement. Jennifer was one of those students who made teaching look easy. What about Alex? Asked Professor Chun, the department's youngest faculty member. Known for her innovative teaching methods and occasionally unconventional ideas. I heard him working on the Liszt Transcendental Etudes last week. Quite impressive for someone his age. Oh yes, Alex will be fine, Professor Johnson replied. Natural talent, excellent preparation. His family's been grooming him for conservatory life since he was 5. He continued down his list, discussing each student with the kind of casual confidence that came from years of predicting outcomes. Then he reached Maya's name and paused slightly. And then we have Maya Rodriguez, he said, his tone shifting to something more thoughtful. She's interesting. Professor Williams, the senior faculty member who had been quietly grading papers in the corner, looked up with curiosity. The scholarship student, the one who works at the coffee shop? That's the one, Professor Johnson confirmed. She's incredibly dedicated, never misses practice time, always comes prepared. But ... double quotes he trailed off, searching for the right words. But Professor Chun prompted, sensing there was more to the story. She's technically competent, but she lacks that special something. You know what I mean? That spark that separates good students from great musicians? She works harder than anyone in the class, but hard work can only take you so far. Professor Williams nodded knowingly. I see students like her every few years. They have the passion, but they started too late, don't have the background. It's admirable, really, but there are limitations. Professor Chun, however, wasn't satisfied with this assessment. She had been watching Maya more carefully than the others realized. There was something about the way Maya listened during master classes. The intensity in her eyes when she observed other students play. What if we're underestimating her? She suggested. The room fell quiet for a moment. Professor Johnson raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, what if we gave her a real challenge? Something that would push her beyond her comfort zone. And see what she's really capable of. Professor Chun set down her coffee cup with a slight clink against the saucer. Professor Williams chuckled. What did you have in mind? She's already struggling with the intermediate repertoire we've assigned. Actually, Professor Chun said, a mischievous glint in her eye, I was thinking of something much more ambitious. She paused for dramatic effect, enjoying the confused looks on her colleagues' faces. What about Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto? The silence that followed was deafening. Professor Johnson nearly choked on his coffee. Professor Williams looked like she had just heard someone suggest that a first-year student should attempt brain surgery. You're joking, Professor Johnson said flatly. I'm completely serious, Professor Chun replied, warming to her idea. Think about it. It's the perfect test. If she can't handle it, she realizes her limitations and adjusts her expectations accordingly. But if she surprises us, If she surprises us, she probably injure herself trying to play something completely beyond her capabilities, Professor Williams interjected. That piece has destroyed the confidence of professional pianists. It's nicknamed the Mount Everest of piano concertos for a reason, Professor Chun shrugged. So we present it as an optional challenge. Extra credit for the attempt, no penalty. If she can't manage it, what's the worst that could happen? Professor Johnson considered this for a moment. He had to admit there was a certain logic to it. Maya was clearly hitting a plateau in her development, and sometimes a seemingly impossible challenge could unlock hidden potential. Or it could confirm their assessment that she had reached her natural limits. It would certainly be educational, he said slowly, for all of us. The more they discussed it, the more the idea took hold. Professor Williams, despite her initial skepticism, began to see the merit in the proposal. It might actually be good for her to face a reality check, she admitted. Better to learn her limitations now than to struggle with unrealistic expectations later. Exactly, Professor Chun agreed, though her motivations were quite different from her colleagues. She had a feeling about Maya that she couldn't quite articulate, a sense that there was more beneath the surface than any of them had seen. The decision was made with the casual confidence of educators who had been making such judgments for decades. They would present the challenge to Maya as an opportunity for extra credit, a chance to push herself beyond the standard curriculum. They expected her to attempt a few pages, perhaps struggle through the opening, and then gracefully accept that some goals were simply beyond reach. The next week, Professor Johnson approached Maya after class. She was packing up her simple music bag, moving with the quiet efficiency that characterized everything she did. The other students had already left, chattering excitedly about their weekend plans and upcoming performances. Maya, could I speak with you for a moment? Professor Johnson's tone was casual, but Maya immediately felt her stomach tighten. Conversations that began this way rarely brought good news. Of course, Professor, she replied, straightening up and giving him her full attention. The faculty has been discussing ways to challenge our advanced students, to push them beyond their comfort zones, he began, choosing his words carefully. We've come up with an optional project that might interest you. Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure where this was heading. Optional projects usually meant extra work for uncertain benefit. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to work on Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Professor Johnson continued, watching her face carefully for a reaction. It's significantly more challenging than anything you've attempted before, but we thought you might benefit from stretching yourself. Maya's expression didn't change, though her heart began beating faster. She knew the piece by reputation. Every serious piano student did. It was legendary for its difficulty, its demands on both technical skill and musical maturity. It would be purely for extra credit, Professor Johnson added quickly, misinterpreting her silence as hesitation. No pressure if you find it's too much. Sometimes it's valuable to attempt something beyond our current level, even if we don't master it completely. What Professor Johnson didn't realize was that Maya's silence had nothing to do with intimidation or hesitation. She was simply trying to process the incredible coincidence of being offered the exact piece she had been secretly studying for over a year. The piece that had consumed her late-night practice sessions, that she had transcribed note by note from recordings, that she knew better than any music she had ever played. "I'd like to try it," Maya said simply, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Professor Johnson smiled approvingly. "Excellent. I admire your willingness to take on a challenge. We'll give you the rest of the semester to work on it. Even if you only manage the first movement or even just a few pages, it will be a valuable learning experience." As Maya walked home that afternoon, she felt like she was living in a strange dream. Her professors had just challenged her to perform the very piece that had become her secret obsession, the piece she had been preparing for in complete solitude. They had no idea that their casual dare was about to unleash something they never saw coming. That night, Maya sat in her small bedroom staring at the official score of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 that Professor Johnson had given her. The thick booklet looked innocent enough, but she knew better. Hidden within those pages were some of the most challenging musical passages ever written. What her professor didn't know was that Maya had been living with this music for over a year, carrying it in her heart like a beautiful secret. It had all started during her second semester at the conservatory. Maya was walking past one of the practice rooms late one evening when she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. Through the heavy door came the most incredible piano music she had ever experienced. Powerful, emotional, and impossibly complex. She pressed her ear to the door, completely mesmerized by what she was hearing. When the music stopped, she quickly stepped away, pretending to walk by casually. The door opened and out came David, a graduate student she recognized but had never spoken to. He looked exhausted but exhilarated, like someone who had just climbed a mountain. "Excuse me," Maya said quietly, gathering her courage. "What was that piece you were playing? It was beautiful." David smiled, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Rachmaninoff's Third, the monster that's been eating my soul for the past 6 months," he said with a tired laugh. "It's my thesis piece. Some days I think it's going to defeat me completely." After David left, Maya stood outside that practice room for a long time, thinking about the music she had just heard. That night, she went home and immediately started searching for recordings. Online, she found a performance by Vladimir Horowitz that made her understand why people called this concerto legendary. The music seemed to contain every human emotion: joy, despair, triumph, and heartbreak, all woven together in impossible complexity. Most students would have listened, appreciated the artistry, and moved on, but Maya couldn't let it go. She started listening to that recording every night, following along with free sheet music she found online. At first, she just wanted to understand the structure, to follow the musical journey that had captivated her so completely. But understanding wasn't enough. Maya began to notice small details in different performances: how Martha Argerich shaped certain phrases differently than Van Cliburn, how Yuja Wang's interpretation brought out rhythmic elements that others glossed over. She started taking notes, comparing recordings, studying the piece like a scholar researching ancient texts. The turning point came 3 months later, when Maya realized she had memorized substantial portions of the concerto just from listening. She found herself humming the themes while walking to work, her fingers unconsciously practicing the passages on her lap during lectures. The music had become part of her, and she knew she had to try playing it. Her first attempts were humbling. The opening alone required a level of power and coordination that Maya had never attempted. Her small hands struggled with the massive chords, and the rapid passages seemed impossibly fast. But instead of giving up, she became obsessed with solving each technical puzzle. Maya developed her own practice methodology out of necessity. Since she couldn't afford private lessons on advanced repertoire, she became her own teacher. She would isolate difficult passages, slow them down to a crawl, and practice them hundreds of times until they became automatic. She studied hand positions. In slow-motion videos, analyzed fingering choices, and experimented with different approaches until she found solutions that worked for her body. The physical demands were enormous. Maya's hands would cramp after intense practice sessions, and she had to learn when to push through discomfort and when to rest to avoid injury. She started doing hand exercises and stretches, treating her preparation like an athlete training for competition. Her practice schedule became even more intense than usual. After her shifts at the coffee shop, Maya would grab a quick dinner and head to the conservatory. She discovered that the practice rooms were often empty after 10 p.m., giving her access to better pianos than her digital keyboard at home. The night security guard, Mr. Peterson, got used to seeing her there and would sometimes check on her during his rounds. "Still working on that crazy piece?" he would ask with a knowing smile. Maya had told him she was practicing something challenging, though she never mentioned exactly what it was. "Getting closer every day," Maya would reply, taking a break to stretch her fingers. The technical challenges were only part of the battle. Maya knew that playing the notes correctly wasn't enough. She needed to understand the emotional depth of the music. She researched Rachmaninoff's life, learning about his struggles with depression, his forced exile from Russia, and the personal pain that influenced his compositions. She wanted to honor not just the technical brilliance of the piece, but its emotional truth. Maya also studied the history of famous performances. She learned about Horowitz's legendary 1978 comeback concert, about how he had to modify certain passages to accommodate his aging hands while still maintaining the music's power. She studied Van Cliburn's victory in the 1958 Tchaikovsky competition, where his performance of this concerto helped bridge Cold War tensions through pure musical excellence. The more she learned, the more she understood what a massive undertaking she had chosen. This wasn't just a difficult piece, it was a rite of passage for serious pianists, a musical mountain that many attempted but few conquered convincingly. Her progress was slow but steady. Maya developed incredible patience, knowing that rushing would only lead to sloppy technique and bad habits. She worked on tiny sections at a time, building the piece like a cathedral, one stone at a time. Some passages took weeks to master, but she never gave up. The hardest part was keeping her project secret. Maya desperately wanted to share her excitement with someone, to get feedback on her progress, but she knew her professors would think she was being unrealistic. Her classmates would probably laugh or worry that she was losing her grip on reality. So she practiced alone, late at night, pouring her heart into music that her teachers believed was beyond her reach. Every small breakthrough felt like a personal victory. When she finally managed to play the entire first movement from memory, she sat in the empty practice room and cried from pure joy and exhaustion. Maya also began working on the orchestral reduction, learning to bring out the accompanying parts when she wasn't playing the solo line. She studied conductor scores, understanding how the piano part fit into the larger orchestral texture. She even found recordings with just the orchestral parts, practicing along as if she were performing with a real symphony. As months passed, Maya's understanding of the piece deepened beyond technical mastery. She began to feel the emotional arc of each movement, the way Rachmaninoff built tension and released it, how he used the piano to sing melodies that seemed impossible for an instrument without a human voice. Her confidence grew quietly but surely. Maya knew she wasn't just learning a piece, she was developing into the kind of musician she had always dreamed of becoming. The countless hours of secret practice were transforming her technique, her musicality, and her understanding of what was possible. When Professor Johnson handed her that official score, Maya had to resist the urge to smile. She already knew every note, every marking, every subtle indication the composer had left for future performers. The challenge her professors thought would humble her was actually the moment she had been preparing for all along. That night, Maya placed the official score next to her handwritten notes and recordings. Tomorrow, she would begin the final phase of her preparation, getting ready to show her professors that sometimes the quiet student in the back row has been hiding something extraordinary. The day of Maya's performance arrived with the kind of nervous energy that fills a conservatory when something unusual is about to happen. Word had spread among the faculty that the quiet scholarship student was going to attempt Rachmaninoff's Third, the piece that had humbled countless professional pianists. Some professors had cleared their schedules just to witness what they expected would be an educational moment about the importance of realistic goals. Maya woke up that morning feeling surprisingly calm. She had barely slept, but it wasn't from nerves, it was from excitement. After more than a year of secret preparation, she was finally going to share this music with others. She went through her usual morning routine, a light breakfast, some gentle hand stretches, and a few minutes of meditation to center herself. At the conservatory, Maya could feel the unusual attention. Students whispered as she walked by, and she caught snippets of conversation about her ambitious attempt and brave but foolish choice. Her classmates looked at her with a mixture of admiration and concern, like someone watching a friend about to attempt a dangerous stunt. The recital hall was more crowded than usual for a student performance. All the piano faculty were there, of course, but Maya was surprised to see professors from other departments, graduate students, and even some of her fellow undergraduates. Professor Johnson had set up a sound system to play the orchestral parts, something usually reserved for much more advanced performances. As Maya walked onto the stage, she could feel dozens of eyes following her every move. The beautiful Steinway grand piano sat waiting under the bright stage lights, its black surface reflecting the audience like a dark mirror. This was a far cry from her late-night practice sessions in empty rooms. This was real, public, and there would be no hiding from whatever happened next. Maya approached the piano bench and took a moment to adjust its height and position. Her hands were steady as she placed her music on the stand, though she knew she wouldn't need it. Every note of this concerto lived in her muscle memory and her heart. She could feel the weight of expectations in the room. Most people were waiting to see how long she would last before the music overwhelmed her. Professor Johnson stood up to introduce the performance. Today, Maya Rodriguez will be performing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 in D minor, he announced. This is one of the most challenging works in the piano repertoire, and we appreciate Maya's willingness to stretch herself with such an ambitious undertaking. The polite applause that followed felt different than usual. It carried an undertone of sympathy, as if the audience was already preparing to console her after an inevitable struggle. Maya simply nodded her thanks and settled at the piano. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The opening orchestral section began playing through the speakers, that haunting melody that had first captured her attention over a year ago. As the piano entrance approached, Maya felt everything else fade away. The crowded hall, the watching professors, the weight of expectations, none of it mattered now. There was only the music. When her moment arrived, Maya's fingers found the opening theme with perfect precision. But something unexpected happened in that first phrase. Instead of the tentative, careful playing everyone expected from a student attempting something beyond her level, the melody soared with confidence and maturity. The notes didn't just sound correct. They sang with genuine musical expression. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and palpable. Professor Chun, who had been sitting casually in her chair, suddenly sat up straight. Professor Williams, who had been preparing her gentle feedback for afterward, found herself completely focused on the music unfolding before her. Even the students who had come to watch their classmates' brave attempt realized they were witnessing something entirely different. As Maya moved into the first movement's more demanding passages, Her performance revealed the depth of her preparation. The rapid scales that should have been stumbling blocks flowed like water under her fingers. The massive chords that typically challenged pianists with much larger hands rang out with surprising power and clarity. Maya had found ways to make every technical challenge work for her, turning limitations into opportunities for creative solutions. But the technical mastery was only part of what stunned the audience. Maya wasn't just playing the notes correctly. She was interpreting the music with a sophistication that usually came from years of professional experience. She understood the emotional architecture of the piece, how Rachmaninoff built tension and released it, how he wove themes together to create a musical narrative that spoke directly to the heart. Professor Johnson found himself completely speechless. In 30 years of teaching, he had heard many talented students, but this was something entirely different. Maya wasn't just performing a difficult piece, she was making it her own, bringing out nuances and emotional depths that he had only heard in recordings by master pianists. The first movement's cadenza arrived, that extended solo section where the pianist performs without orchestral accompaniment, traditionally the moment where technical weaknesses are most exposed. Everyone in the audience held their breath, expecting this to be where Maya's limitations would finally show. Instead, she delivered a performance that was both technically brilliant and deeply musical, her small hands navigating the treacherous passages with grace and power that seemed impossible. As Maya launched into the second movement, the lyrical intermezzo that requires a completely different kind of musical sensitivity, the audience realized they weren't watching a student struggling with an impossible challenge. They were witnessing the emergence of a serious artist who had been hiding in plain sight. The gentle, singing melodies of the second movement showcased another side of Maya's musicianship. Where the first movement had demonstrated her technical capabilities, this section revealed her emotional depth and sensitivity. Every phrase was shaped with care, every dynamic change felt natural and inevitable. She played like someone who had lived with this music for years, understanding its every subtlety. Graduate students who had been working on this same piece for their thesis performances found themselves taking mental notes on Maya's interpretation. Her phrasing choices were mature and thoughtful, her use of rubato natural and expressive. This wasn't someone copying what they had heard in recordings. This was a musician who had developed her own relationship with the music. The third movement brought the concerto to its thunderous conclusion, demanding everything a pianist could give in terms of power, speed, and endurance. Maya met every challenge head-on, her performance building to a climax that had the entire audience on the edge of their seats. The final passages, which often sound rushed or frantic even in professional performances, rang out with clarity and purpose under her hands. As the last notes faded into silence, the recital hall remained completely quiet for several seconds. It was the kind of silence that follows truly exceptional performances, not the awkward quiet of an audience unsure how to respond, but the awed hush of people who know they have just experienced something extraordinary. Then the applause began. But it wasn't the polite, encouraging applause typically given to student recitals. This was the kind of enthusiastic, genuine appreciation usually reserved for professional concerts. Students and faculty members were on their feet, their expressions showing a mixture of amazement, admiration, and complete shock. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her face flushed, but calm. She had just revealed a secret that had been growing inside her for over a year, and the relief of finally sharing her musical truth was overwhelming. Looking out at the stunned faces in the audience, she realized that everything was about to change. The quiet student who had been overlooked and underestimated had just announced herself as a force to be reckoned with. The silence that followed Maya's performance stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then, like a dam bursting, the entire recital hall erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very walls. But this wasn't ordinary applause, it was the kind of thunderous, sustained ovation usually reserved for world-famous artists at Carnegie Hall. Not student recitals at a small conservatory. Professor Johnson sat frozen in his chair, his hands mechanically clapping while his mind struggled to process what he had just witnessed. In 3 decades of teaching, he had developed what he thought was an infallible ability to assess student potential. He could usually predict within minutes how far a student might progress, what their limitations would be, and which ones had that rare spark of true artistry. But Maya had just shattered every assumption he had made about her. Professor Chun was the first faculty member to stand, her face beaming with a mixture of vindication and amazement. She had sensed something special about Maya, but even her intuition hadn't prepared her for this level of artistry. As she applauded, she caught Professor Williams' eye across the room. The senior faculty member looked like she had just witnessed a magic trick that defied all logical explanation. Maya stood beside the piano, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath from the demanding performance. The roar of applause washed over her like a warm wave, but what struck her most was the look on people's faces. Gone were the polite, encouraging smiles she was used to receiving. Instead, she saw genuine amazement, respect, and something she had never experienced before, recognition as a serious musician. As the applause finally began to die down, students and faculty members started approaching the stage. David, the graduate student whose practice session had first introduced Maya to this piece, pushed through the crowd with tears in his eyes. "Maya, that was incredible," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been working on that piece for over a year, and you just played it better than I've ever heard it performed live. How long have you been preparing it?" Maya's answer sent another shock wave through the gathering crowd. "About 14 months, she said quietly. "I started learning it not long after I heard you practicing it." The revelation that Maya had been secretly mastering this impossibly difficult piece for over a year left everyone speechless. Professor Johnson finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than usual. "Maya, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. How much of our curriculum have you been finding done challenging?" It was a question that cut straight to the heart of everything that had just happened. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, professors who had been unconsciously holding her back, classmates who had never realized her true capabilities, and suddenly she understood that this performance had been about much more than just playing a piece of music. "Professor," Maya said carefully, "I've been grateful for everything you've taught me. But I've also been teaching myself pieces that I thought you'd consider too advanced for me." I didn't want to seem presumptuous or ungrateful. Professor Williams stepped forward, her expression a mixture of regret and admiration. "Maya, I owe you an apology. We all do. We've been treating you like a promising beginner when you're clearly an advanced artist. That's our failure, not yours." Word of Maya's performance spread through the conservatory like wildfire. Within hours, students who hadn't been there were seeking out recordings that someone had made on their phone. Faculty members from other departments stopped by the piano department to ask about the student who played Rachmaninoff's Third. The story seemed almost too incredible to believe. By the next morning, Maya's phone was buzzing with messages and calls. Professor Johnson had contacted several colleagues at other institutions, and suddenly there were inquiries about graduate school applications, scholarship opportunities, and competition entries. The regional symphony conductor, who had connections at the conservatory, heard about the performance and wanted to meet Maya about potential solo opportunities, but perhaps the most significant change was in how Maya saw herself. For so long, she had been the outsider looking in, the scholarship student who didn't quite belong in the world of serious classical music. She had internalized the subtle messages that her background, her late start, and her financial circumstances meant she would always be playing catch-up with her more privileged peers, standing on that stage, receiving a standing ovation from people who truly understood the difficulty of what she had just accomplished. Maya felt something shift inside her. She wasn't just a hard-working student anymore. She was a musician with real potential, someone whose voice mattered in the classical music world. The practical changes came quickly. Professor Johnson completely restructured Maya's lesson plan, introducing her to advanced repertoire that matched her actual abilities rather than what they had assumed were her limitations. Other faculty members started inviting her to master classes and special events that had previously been reserved. For the most promising graduate students, Maya's classmates' attitudes toward her changed dramatically as well. Jennifer, who had always been polite but distant, approached Maya the day after the performance with genuine warmth. "I had no idea," she said simply. "That was absolutely beautiful. Would you mind if I asked you about some of the technical passages? I'm working on the same piece for my senior recital, and your interpretation gave me ideas I hadn't considered." The conversation that followed was the first time Maya had ever felt like an equal among her peers. They discussed musical choices, technical solutions, and interpretive approaches as colleagues rather than as the struggling scholarship student. And the naturally gifted star, Alex, whose family's wealth and connections had always made Maya feel inadequate, sought her out with an unusual request. "My parents are hosting a charity concert next month," he said. "They usually bring in professional soloists, but after hearing you play yesterday, I suggested they invite you instead. Would you be interested?" The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. Maya would be performing for an audience of wealthy donors and music lovers, the kind of people who attended symphony galas and knew their classical music. A year ago, the thought would have seemed impossible. Now, it felt like a natural next step, but the most meaningful change was in Maya's relationship with her grandmother. That evening, Maya called home and tried to explain what had happened at school. Her grandmother, who had never fully understood Maya's passion for classical music, listened as her granddaughter described the standing ovation, the professor's amazement, and the opportunities that were suddenly opening up. "Mia," her grandmother said softly, "I always knew you were special when you played that little keyboard. I just didn't know how to help you show the world. But you found your own way, didn't you?" As Maya settled into her new reality, she realized that her secret year of preparation had been about more than just learning a difficult piece of music. It had been about proving to herself that she belonged in this world, that talent and determination could overcome the advantages that money and connections provided. The quiet student who had once sat in the back corner of the classroom was gone, replaced by a confident young artist who understood her own worth. Maya had always known she loved music, but now she knew something even more important. She was genuinely good at it, good enough to make it her life's work. The professors who had once seen her as a hardworking but limited student now recognized her as one of the most promising musicians they had ever taught. The challenge they had issued as a gentle reality check had instead revealed that Maya was already far beyond what any of them had imagined possible. Sometimes the biggest transformations happen not when we become someone new, but when we finally have the courage to show the world who we've been all along.